Hello, welcome along to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. This week we're chatting to Patrick Syms, who has a new book out. It's called Am I the Asshole? Patrick is doing something really interesting with how he's getting his book out there as well. You can hear why he's been inspired by music releases.
So I've basically lifted a concept from the music business and specifically the world of records. It's very normal for a long time and still is to create a small batch of promotional records called a white label. And as the name suggests, there's minimal packaging, just a plain sleeve and a white label on the record on which the barest of information is conveyed, either handwritten often, sometimes it's a sticker that's printed in your printer, or often hand stamps. So I thought, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a white label promo of my novel at the same time that I send out my query letters.
And what he did when he felt like he was trying too hard to make a point with his prose.
I think the conclusion I came to was, I've got to stop trying to say something. Because if you try to say something, it'll be too obvious and it'll be preachy and it'll be didactic, and that's the last thing I wanted. So part of the rewrite process was just the idea that I had to let go of a desire to make a point and be more subtle about it. I guess that's the one thing that my one slight fear is that what I think I've done, I've been so sort of hands-off and I've taken such a step back because I don't want to be didactic, I don't want to be preachy, that I've actually ended up writing something completely different that people interpret in a completely different way. But I guess that's the kind of the age-old conundrum, isn't it?
It's all on the way with Patrick Syms in a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. Yes, welcome along to the show. My name's Dan Simpson. This is Writer's Routine. It's the podcast where we take a look inside an author's working day. We figure out how they do it, where and when they do it. What else do they do that gives themselves the best chance of getting words down on the page? Now, this week we're with Patrick Syms. Patrick's got a really interesting story of how his story has come to be. I think you'll really find it quite inspiring. Now, Patrick started his career with ambitions of being a screenwriter, and he almost got there. Very close. Life, as it tends to do, got in the way, and he took a job in advertising, which turned into a 25-year-long career in communications. And recently, he's decided to return to writing, novel writing this time. And he's taking it seriously, which is what we always hear that you need to do. It's not that you're an aspiring writer. No, you are a writer, so treat it as such. Well, Patrick's done that. He went back to school, being selected for the Curtis Brown Writing Your Novel course. And he's just finished Am I the Asshole? Arsehole. A tragic, comic, midlife crisis drama set in present-day Manchester. It's all about the entrepreneur Richard Whitecross, who realises that, very simply, he sells gimmicky, worthless gadgets online. Surely there's more to it than that. So he invents what he thinks is a piece of world-changing technology, only it malfunctions and he becomes the target of a social media pile-on. And soon he starts to wonder, am I the asshole? It's all inspired by a celeb that Patrick saw interviewed on the telly, and he didn't quite like the cut of their jib, didn't think they were coming across well, and he wondered, what else could happen? How could this be? You can hear all about the development of the idea and how the final book has taken many twists and turns from the original premise. Now, Patrick has finished the book and is querying agents, and while waiting for something to hopefully happen there, he's doing something a bit different, inspired by music releases, which is a world Patrick knows very well. He's printed a limited run of the book in a bid to get some noise out there, to get some interest. He'll run us through that whole plan and maybe the trickier parts of that self-promotion. I think there's a lot that you'll enjoy and take away from this, so let's get into it with Patrick Syms, and we start, as we always do, with what he sees around him in the place where he sits down to write.
Yeah, so I'm in the main room of my flat. Normally, I spent for a long time writing at my dining table. underneath an enormous poster which says "It's okay," which I find really useful for writing and also for life in general. I kind of find it pays to try and maintain a positive outlook. I say normally, I've actually got this really annoying minor injury in my neck, which means I was experiencing a ton of discomfort in my arm. And the physio said, well, you've got to sort out your work position, make it ergonomic. So I bought myself a laptop stand and I got my Bluetooth keyboard and mouse, made sure my chair was set up correctly, and it made no difference whatsoever. What I did find, however, was that if I plonked myself on my sofa on the other side of the room, still with a good view of the poster, I could sit there with my laptop on my lap, and everything's at 90 degrees, and I'm super comfy. So that's actually where I'm sitting, and I can see in front of me all my records, some posters, a picture that my son did when he was about 9. And yeah, it's all kind of comfy. Feels good.
You're a bit like me that I know, and you're focused on how different writers do it and the differences that things make. Have you noticed in the process of making yourself more comfortable and being on the sofa, has that changed the way that you work at all?
I don't think it has, no. I think the other important part of my process is that I'm a chain tree tea drinker. I can't say that quickly. A chain tea drinker. So I basically, as soon as I finish one cuppa, I need to get up and make another one. So that's the unifying thing. It hasn't changed, whether I was at my desk or if I'm in the library, because sometimes I'll kind of feel like a change of scene, and perhaps I'll take myself off to the library, take myself off to a cafe nearby. But the same principle applies. I need to find a sofa or a kind of like an armchair-y type situation. But otherwise, nothing's really changed. I still drink my tea, and I still, I'm banging away.
So there's the poster above where you sometimes work, as in when you feel able to sit at the desk. What is there that's more pertinent to actually what you're writing? So not inspirational pictures, but like you're plotting detritus. Does that exist anywhere? Is that around you?
No. For a long time, I made a conscious effort to be more digital and not rely so much on paper. And then it just kind of happened before I realized it. I was just doing that. So everything, all my note taking, all my plotting, it's all in my laptop. How
is it laid out? In what form does that planning exist?
So I've got probably too many notes in my notes application. So I kind of bounce between having one central one where I add notes to, or creating new ones, and I'm completely disorganized in that. And simultaneously, I've got like folders, or rather research files in Scrivener as well, where I kind of just dump notes to myself. And then finally, I realized this the other day, sometimes when I'm out and about and I have an idea, I might record a little voice note to myself. But then, this was the subsequent kind of realization, I realized I'd stopped doing that. And to be honest, I kind of take fewer notes now to remind myself, because I realized that when I went back and looked at a lot of them were terrible and were useless. And I concluded that really important stuff I remember anyway. So I kind of work quite clean in that sense.
You mentioned Scrivener there. We get quite niche, we get quite nerdy. What's your software of choice? Is it just Scrivener? Have you dabbled? Do you drop in and out? And what's your font preference?
So when I first embarked upon this kind of new writing phase 4 or 5 years ago, I started out. How did I start out? I thought I'll be kind of high tech and modern, and I'll use Google Docs. But I couldn't quite work out how to create something longer than like an essay. What happens when you want chapters? What happens when you want scenes? What happens when you want to move things around, which I kind of instinctively do. Having used Word like my entire working life, I kind of concluded that, or rather I assumed I couldn't do that, although I'm probably sure you probably can, but I have a love-hate relationship with Word. And then I've relatively quickly found Scrivener, and to be honest, I absolutely love it. It's got that primed functionality of being able to set out all your scenes and being able to move them around if you want to really easily. And I absolutely love that. I'm quite evangelical about Scrivener, despite the fact that I probably use only about 5% of the functionality. It's a bit like Word in that sense. There's a ton of things you can do in Word that I've never learned. I, just used to write words, Same with Scrivener. I mean, there are other bits and pieces that I use, like kind of version controls and things like that. I think it's Snapshot they call it. But by and large, yeah, I mean, I love Scrivener, but I don't use much of it.
Well, I have used it in the past, and I generally get on well with it. I know that the big criticism that some people have is that they they get swept up in the hype around something, and then they jump in, and then they realise that actually using a more basic word processor is well basic. They get put off by everything in front of them. Now, you, as most people, use 5 or 10% of something like Scrivener. But is that easy enough for you to use? Did it require a lot of learning?
I don't think it did. No, once I worked out how to create kind of that whole sort of file nesting structure, so I can set out my acts, I can set out my kind of save the cat plot points and so on, beats or whatever, and then populate those with scenes and moving around, as I see fit. Once I learned that, which was relatively easy, I was all set.
So, what about your font, Patrick? Because you used to work in advertising, right? So, we'll come to the influence that's had on how you're thinking of how you're publishing the book. But because of the advertising experience, does that mean you're much more precious about fonts than others?
Well, I am not a creative when I work in advertising. So, I'm on the strategy side. That said, yes, I'm very kind of design focused. But when it came to Scrivener, I'm using Palatino. And to be honest, I have no idea why I'm using Palatino. Is it the default font, perhaps? But however I got there, I really like it now. So I'm kind of, whenever I'm in Scrivener, I use that. And then when it comes to sharing either excerpts from my writing group, or now that I'm submitting or querying agents, I transfer everything to Word, and I just basically aggregate everything in Word, by which stage it's Times New Roman, I guess, kind of industry standard.
So, Patrick, the show is Writer's Routine. Just take us through a day in the life of you writing this novel, because I know that you took some time out to do it. So how did the whole thing look?
Right. So, yeah, I've taken some time out. I work freelance now. So if I'm not working on a project, and for a little while I chose not to kind of chase a project, and I was lucky enough to be able to kind of have some cash to do that. So on a writing day, I like to start the day with some exercise just to clear my head, to set myself up with some positive energy and some momentum. So when I'm organized, I'll get up pretty early and I'll get to the gym, and I'll get back from the gym in time to start, have some breakfast and start work by about 9, start writing by about 9. And then I'll work through till lunch, or 1, 2-ish at the latest, and I'll break. I'll make a bite to eat. I'll listen to the news on the radio, and then I'll get back to it as soon as I can. And I say as soon as I can because I quite often find that I struggle to get back into it after lunch. It really kind of breaks the momentum. But ideally, I'd do another couple of hours, 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon, and normally sort of break around 6 p.m. And having said that, there was one crazy week when I was kind of in between work projects and I desperately wanted to make some progress. I basically imposed a deadline on myself. And to be honest, I'm not sure if I could do it again, but I managed to crack out 15,000 words from Monday to Friday, which sounds great. But to be honest, I was absolutely exhausted at the end of it, and I think I needed a week off afterwards to recover. So that was totally unsustainable. But at that moment in time, it was really useful for me because I was feeling like I wasn't making enough progress, and I felt like I was slacking and letting myself down. So I really needed that to kind of give myself some energy and some positivity about what I was doing.
Well, we'll expand on this in just a sec, but while we're here, so you're only writing this for yourself at that point, right? You've not got an agent, you're not under contract. So the only person that's feeling like you're slacking is you. In this process, how much have you found that you are your own roadblock at times?
Oh, you're your own roadblock. Yeah, I mean, the converse of that, or the flip side of that, is that you're right. I was setting my own deadlines. And in a sense, I've been kind of quite harsh on myself in that I've kind of returned to writing after a very long time. Well, as soon as I came out of university, rather, even before I left university, the plan was I was going to be a filmmaker. And in my final year at university, I did a drama writing course. Off my own bat, I made a couple of short films. And so I graduated thinking, this is what I'm going to do with my life. And to get my foot in the door, I'm going to focus on screenwriting. So I spent a bunch of years trying to develop that. And then very quickly realized I needed, to earn some money. So I started working in advertising really as a sort of as a kind of a temporary measure. Fast forward a few years, I've progressed in the job, starting a young family. I'm getting close to converting the screenwriting to kind of paid work. But basically, I kind of ran out of steam. I was just exhausted. I couldn't juggle all of these things. And so I basically pulled the plug on it. So fast forward like 20 odd years, and I've decided to re-engage and do this thing that I get a ton of pleasure from. But I kind of feel like I've wasted a lot of time. So I'm in a kind of a hurry. I've got a ton of ideas that I want to express and basically turn into stories. And so, yeah, I've kind of put myself under quite a lot of pressure. But having said that, I've also found that in those few moments where I've put a lot of pressure on myself and really kind of try to squeeze out progress, it's actually kind of backfired because I just kind of get to the point where it stops being fun. When it stops being fun, I think you're less creative and you don't do it as well as you might do. And so I kind of have to then take a step back and just take a breather and perhaps take a few days off and so on. And it all depends on, if I've had work to do as well, there's a natural break there. But the point is that, I feel like I've got some catching up to do.
How has that focus in knowing you've got some catching up to do helped you?
I think what's helped is that, and I'm not sure what the chicken or what the egg is, but, and part of the reason I didn't do anything for a long time, didn't do any writing for a long time, was that, for most of my life, since a kid, I've been kind of not particularly confident, not particularly self-assured, always thought, what I was doing wasn't particularly good. And so there was always a sort of a reason not to do it. And returning to it, I kind of made a promise to myself that I was going to flip that on its head and basically think I could do this rather than look at all the reasons why I might not do it. So it's the combination of those two things. Yes, I feel like I've in a sense wasted a lot of time, coupled with the fact that I'm now thinking, well, why not me? Coupled with the fact that I've got like a drawer full of ideas that I want to get done, means that, yeah, I sometimes feel like I'm a little tank. I've just got to kind of keep plugging away, and that it's a question of when, not if. And that's a function of just keeping going and keeping doing it. And so even if, on what I've written here, even if I don't get an agent this time and I don't get a publishing deal, I just keep telling myself that it'll be the next one. And if it's not that, it will be the next one. And I just got to keep plugging away, with the kind of caveat that I'm actually pretty old now. And if I don't make some progress, I'm not going to get much done before I croak.
I guess what will make you happy with it? At what point what do you want this book to get you?
What do I want this book to get me? That's actually a really good question. And I'm not sure if I've ever really thought about it in those terms. I think I have a sort of an overarching aim, which is to be able to support myself, not having to step back into the world that I've worked in for a long time. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's given me a lot and I really appreciate it. But now I want to do less and less of that. And the ideal is, that I don't do any of that at all. And I spend all my time, writing and making things, because just generally I kind of just enjoy making stuff, and really this book is a step towards that. I don't think I've put any huge kind of a specific objective on it. Obviously, I'd love to get an agent. I'd love for someone to think this is worthwhile, and that in turn someone might, a publishing house might feel that they might want to publish it. But even if not, I'm here, I've done it. I'm proud of where it's got to. Do I think it could be better? Yeah, of course. But it's at a stage where I'm actually quite proud of it. And even if that avenue is closed or it's not open yet, at least I've done this and I've got a record of it and I can move on to the next one quickly. And hopefully in the process, even if it doesn't convert to agent and publishing deal and so on and so forth, it's generated a bit of visibility for me, and that's how I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it as self-promotion rather than self-publishing.
At what point are you at with the kind of work / writing balance now? So working freelance, is there a set amount that you'll dedicate to doing like more paid work? Is it days of the week? Is it simply so you've got enough to pay your rent? What is it? How do you address that balance?
Well, it tends to be kind of all or nothing. I think I've learned that I find it difficult to do two things at once, two kind of brain intensive things at once. So when I've got a project, as I've kind of hinted so far, I tend to like put the pen down. I've got a work project, then I'll focus on that. And then, in between projects, I'll either purposely not pick up another one. And, I'm lucky enough to be old enough to have a little bit of savings, which has, I've dipped into in order to kind of, pay myself in a sense, So that's where I'm at. I've kind of, now that I've got to the point with the book, once I've kind of got through this promotional phase, which I guess is probably going to take me, the next month or two, then, I'm going to be ready to jump back into a chunky work project, like a 6-month project or something like that.
Just back to the day then. So you said there was that one very hectic week where you got 15 or so thousand words done. What are you happy with getting done on a regular writing day?
Good question. So, from way back when I was really trying hard to get the screenwriting thing going, I spend a lot of time learning about structure because, structure is hugely important in screenwriting. And so I've brought that into my prose writing, and I kind of like to have an idea about where I'm going. I like to have a plan of almost like a map. So I tend to, I like to plot out what those acts look like, what the turning points are of those acts, what the midpoint might be, what inside the incident is, and so on and so forth. And so I kind of plan out quite specifically what all my scenes are. And once I've got that, I'm really happy if I can just plug through those and, get through perhaps 1,000, 1,500 words a day. Sometimes it doesn't go as well and there might be 500, but, on average, if I can kind of hit like 1,000 a day, I'm pretty happy.
And you like to start the day with exercise. What have you learned helps the words come out when things are a little bit tricky?
To step away, I guess. To step away, go for a walk, listen to some music, have a dance around the living room. Music's really important to me. And yeah, I think it's kind of that, you can't push it really. I think you can push it to a point, but it's almost like your body's telling you that this is kind of enough. It's not really working. And so, yeah, I kind of put my pen down. I'll go and do something else. I'll perhaps go and do something else creative. Like I kind of, the crazy thing about writing a novel is it takes a long time. Even fast people are cranking out a book a year. It takes a year to realize that thing. And I love also doing things which are a lot more immediate. Like, I'm a very bad sort of carpenter, and occasionally I like to make a little bit of furniture. But, you can pick up your tools and create something in a day and it's done, and you can look at it and go, yeah, it looks terrible, but I did it. You know what I mean? I kind of like to dabble with a bit of art and things like that. And I kind of feel that, yeah, often doing something that's creative, but in a very different space can kind of free up and loosen me up and just bring back a bit of positivity. Because that's the thing, if you're wading through, thousands of words, and it's difficult to see, apart from that word count, it's really difficult to appreciate the progress you're making because it's still not finished. It's not a finished article. So yeah, sort of a different stimulus is good. First of all, I made a decision to switch from screenwriting to prose fiction. And that was largely because, much as I love writing scripts, once you've done it and you've revised it and you've got it to a place that you're happy with, it's still not a finished article. You're still then dependent upon someone, paying to produce it and film it or whatever. Or if you're writing a play, you've got to convince someone to finance the performance or whatever. And so I like the idea of being able to do something creative in storytelling and to basically have the finished article, even if no one else has agreed to get behind it. So, you can write a novel, and even if you don't have an agent or a publishing deal, you can share it with your friends and family and anyone else who might want to be inclined to read it, and it's finished, And so that I found hugely appealing. So that was the first thing. I decided to switch to prose fiction. And, clearly with a background in screen or attempting to screenwrite, what I'm writing in fiction is very cinematic. So there's a consistency there, but ultimately the kind of expression of it is in prose fiction. So that's the first choice. The second was, I thought, well, if I'm kind of committing to this and I want to give myself every chance to kind of make it more than simply something I share with my friends, I wanted to do some training. So I looked into doing a course. I think I kind of quickly realized that because I'm in a hurry, I wanted something shorter but meaty. And so I kind of discounted doing an MA or something like that because it felt like, a year felt like a long time back then. And I quickly narrowed it down to the Faber Academy and to Curtis Brown Creative, both of which have novel writing courses. And the Curtis Brown deadline was the first one. So I said to myself, okay, so I'll submit to this. And if I'm not selected, then I'll try for the Faber. And so I did that. I set my application package off. And I was lucky enough to be accepted to the Curtis Brown course, which I have to say at the time was just the most enormous endorsement, because here I was returning to something that for all my life I just kind of felt I wasn't quite good enough for and didn't have the confidence and so on and so forth. So to be accepted onto a selective course run by, a really reputable outfit was a huge endorsement, and it kind of did me the world of good. So that was the second choice. And the third, I guess, was to really kind of back myself in whichever way that manifested. And part of it might be to tell myself it's okay not to work for a patch of time and to fund that with my savings. So that's backing myself. I guess investing in the cause was backing myself. And to do what I'm doing right now, I mean, it's on the one hand, it's ridiculously you can see it as ridiculously arrogant that I'm going, well, okay, I've done this now, and here, take a look at it. But at the same time, it's kind of, why not? I'm proud of it. I believe in myself now, even if I haven't for a long time. So why not do this? I'm backing myself all the way.
You have given screenwriting a good crack, so you understand. You've worked in, even if it's the back end of kind of advertising and communications, you still have a clear understanding of what storytelling requires. Yet you've gone back to school, in effect. You've taken on the Curtis Brown course. Now, that gave you a lot in terms of simply getting in, so having their endorsement. What did you actually learn? What was surprising that you learned on the course that maybe you didn't anticipate your eyes being opened to?
I think there are three things that I got from that course. And I guess the third was the one that was the most pleasantly surprising. So obviously, we had a fantastic tutor in Charlotte Mendelssohn. Every week she'd start off with a kind of an hour's worth tutorial and perhaps some exercises in the room on subjects like, characterization, structure, and so on and so forth. So that was the first real benefit. The second was simply the fact that it was a workshop structure, and it got you really into the habit of not only giving feedback and giving notes, but also, most importantly, receiving feedback, because nothing is made in a vacuum. You're always going to have people with opinions, and if you're lucky enough to get a deal, there's going to be the editorial process. So just having the capacity to kind of navigate that process was super important and really helpful. And then the third one, which was a bit of a surprise, I think I probably knew it, but then just experiencing it was just joyous, was meeting a bunch of really smart, funny, supportive people who, have now, we continue, all my classmates on that course, we still see each other almost every month. And, we continue submitting things for each other to critique and so on. And, that's been the real revelation, how lasting that group of who are friends now, I guess. Yeah, it's been great.
So I'm really interested in how the novel comes to be, released off your own back, and we'll cover that in just a sec. But let's talk about actually what the novel is. So this is Am I the Arsehole? I know, but it's like asshole, but I can't bring myself to say that. I have to be like properly British, like, am I the arsehole? Just tell us about the first moment that the idea for this came into your mind.
Yeah, well, it's odd, isn't it? Because the spark is now probably nowhere really to be found in the finished article. But the initial sort of inspiration was seeing a celebrity on TV reacting really aggressively to an accusation that their unconscious bias was showing. And I was really fired up. I was ready to write a hatchet job on a fictionalized version of this person, about how unself-aware they were and how aggressive they were when they were being challenged. But I quickly realized that would be pretty preachy, and it would be a bit one-dimensional. And I decided that I needed to paint a more rounded picture of that main character. And it slowly sort of evolved into something which, on the one hand, is a much more gentle. And I think were I starting this now, I perhaps might have more successfully been able to do sort of that hatchet job without making it one-dimensional. But I think, I've been on a really steep learning curve through this process. I think now I perhaps might be more capable of doing that. But what I ended up doing was something that some people might argue is a lot more autobiographical. I couldn't possibly comment, but it's I think in a sense it's a lot more gentle. It's it's kind of a bit more knockabout, I think, as well.
Did this idea come about at a time when ideas were just sparking quite naturally, and just you were sticking it on the back burner and thinking, when I write, I'll come to this? Or was it at a time when you had decided you wanted to write, so you were actively seeking something to explore?
My head doesn't quite work like that. I've always got like a ton of ideas. And to be honest, on my kind of slate of things that I want to get to, one or two of them are like 30 years old. This was actually quite fresh. And like I said, I saw this TV thing. It was probably like a year before I started. So it was definitely front of mind. And it's not like I kind of search around for things. I think it's just stuff that gets under my skin, and I feel like I want to address it rather than sort of sitting there thinking, I need to find an idea to write about. It's very much the former, is that something kind of like it's a niche that kind of I need to scratch. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And you say that you... So how far into writing it were you when you decided that perhaps this might just be a rather one-dimensional hatchet job and you needed to slightly tweak things?
So that was while I was still in the kind of planning phase. It was like, how do I make a cohesive whole of this that starts here and ends there, and there's some sort of character arc that kind of joins the two? And I think it was because I was struggling to make a sort of a cohesive arc of that for that character that I realized that it was just a bit. Yeah, I was just using my anger as a stimulus, and I needed something a bit more than that.
And during that planning stage, how much did you get down? What do you like to know before you started writing?
You see, this is where I've got a big kind of amnesiac gap in my memory, is that I can remember, and I've still got those initial notes, and they're horrifically bad. And I know where I was at in terms of how I kind of conceived the entirety before I started actually writing sentences. What I really cannot remember is how I got from that excruciatingly bad set of notes to something which I was relatively comfortable with. I'm not quite sure what the connective tissue was between those.
Well, just talking about the tone then, let's focus on that, because the excruciatingly bad notes, perhaps your first idea of what this might be, as you said, one-dimensional hatchet job, whereas this billed as like a tragicomic midlife drama. There's a lot going on. How tricky was it for you to strike that right balance of tone, in that you want to say something, but you also want to make it a bit dramatic and also funny at the same time?
Yeah. So in terms of that wanting to say something, I think the conclusion I came to was I've got to stop trying to say something. Because if you try to say something, it'll be too obvious and it'll be preachy and it'll be didactic, and that's the last thing I wanted. So part of the rewrite process, or perhaps it was perhaps that was what was in that gap, was just the idea that I had to let go of a desire to make a point and be more subtle about it. I guess that's the one thing that my one slight fear is that what I think I've done, I might have been or rather what I was trying to achieve in the first instance, I've been so sort of hands off, and I've taken such a step back because I don't want to be didactic, I don't want to be preachy, that I've actually ended up writing something completely different that people interpret in a completely different way. But I guess that's the kind of the age-old conundrum, isn't it?
It's so hard, though, because everyone knows that they should show and not tell, which is, I guess, what you're alluding to. But it's really hard to actually drum that into your mind and make you do it. What do you remember about doing something rather than kind of saying something, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I think I was in the lucky position of my first draft definitely had too much telling. And but at the same time, I had all that I needed to show it. So when I was redrafting, I cut out a lot of the more obvious, explicit preachiness and just let the action speak for itself. And I hope I struck the right balance.
But you need a plot to drive this thing. And the plot now doesn't center on simply a celebrity who is affronted when they're accused of being something they think they're not. I mean, you've got Richard Whitecross in this now. And so from what you remember, there's the amnesiac middle, and maybe your brain doesn't work this way, but what do you remember about the thought that, oh, hang on, I need a plot to drive this narrative along, this thought, this idea along?
Oh, well, there was always going to be a plot. And there, if anything, my first draft had even more plot. There was like a ton of more stuff going on. And I actually lost quite a lot of stuff that I really quite liked. And who knows, if I'm lucky enough to, get an agent and a publishing deal, the editor that I'm assigned might decide to add some of that stuff back in again. But there was always going to be a plot. And so, I kind of, the fiction, the films that I like, the TV that I like, it kind of sits in that crossover position between out and out genre with like tons of plot and literary, like highbrow films and literary novels. I like a plot, and I kind of naturally gravitate towards a plot, but hopefully with a little bit of kind of depth to it as well. So yeah, the plot was never really a problem. But the problem was structuring a plot in a way that was emotionally satisfying and made sense and took Richard, my main character, my protagonist, on an arc which I felt was that readers would find satisfying and that worked.
And what were you deliberating about with that? So many people have so many ideas how to do that. They might follow more traditional, the 5-act structure of how to do that, or Save the Cat, which you've mentioned earlier. How organically did you try and figure out their emotional plot and resolution?
Yeah. So when I first started, I was just aiming to create a 3-act structure, and this is everything I recollected from my time trying to write screenplays and TV. So I wanted a 3-act structure with an inciting incident and probably a sort of a midpoint where things kind of switched up. And that was just kind of as developed as my thinking was, and that first draft was sort of structured like that. Although I wasn't really feeling, or rather, I hadn't quite nailed what each of those points should do. So I got through my first draft on that basis, and it wasn't hugely working. So then one of my classmates, Felipe, he gave me a book called Story Genius by Lisa Cron. And I guess that I got 2 things from that. One was just the notion of the distinction between the plot, the events that happen, and the kind of the change that plot, those events elicit in the main character. And that was a huge kind of step forward. And then secondly, just on a really practical basis, in that book, she recommends that every scene answers 5 questions. And if you can answer the same 5 questions for each scene, you end up with a really tightly woven together narrative, which each scene or each chapter naturally sets up a desire in the reader to continue reading. And I found that super helpful. So in fact, my second proper draft, I didn't actually write any sentences. I just went through the entire novel and answered those 5 questions for every scene. And it really highlighted where it was getting a bit flabby or where I had gaps and so on and so forth. So my second draft, I call it a second draft, but it was really structural. And I didn't write any sentences, so that when I came to write what I call my third draft, I knew exactly what every scene needed to do. And some of it, I was close in my first draft, so I got quite close. In others, less so, and I knew where I needed a tweak. And even there were some instances in which there were huge gaps in my first draft. I thought I'd finished, but then I went back to it and there were big gaps. So when I came to writing that next proper draft, I knew exactly what I needed to do. And in some instances, the answers to those 5 questions were quite long, so I could cut and paste what I'd already got. So that kind of made the process relatively fast.
What are the 5 questions?
The 5 questions are, let me refresh my memory. The 5 questions are, okay, so for each scene, you need to work out what happens. That's question 1, what happens. The second one is, what are the consequences of that action? The third one is, why does it matter to your protagonist or whoever, whichever character? What is the realization? So something has changed and your main character has come to a new realization, new understanding. And so then the final question is, based on that new understanding, based on that realization, what does that character do next? And so that then pushes you into the next scene. And I found it really helpful.
Is it tricky to then, if in every scene you're answering these questions, to make it not like abundantly clear that's what you're doing, to try and hide that and weave it in so an audience, that's what the reason why those questions exist, is because that's what an audience wants to know, but they don't know that, right? So how was the process of trying to kind of make those answers organic? Was that straightforward?
It's a really good question, because I found quite quickly that if you explicitly answer all those questions on the page, it sometimes works against you. So yeah. So for example, what does the character do? That essentially is kind of revealed later, or rather I found that if I kind of held that back and revealed it later, it becomes more of an at-heart. If you don't telegraph it, then that's what creates that expectation and that desire to read on. And I guess also, as I progressed through that draft, I realized that occasionally I might want to like break those rules. It's like any kind of how-to book, whether it be screenwriting or whatever. I find I get most out of them if I kind of cherry pick bits from here and bits from there, So yeah, towards the end, I completely break some of those rules, and depending on who you ask, it kind of works well or doesn't. But I guess that's right in a book. You're not going to please everyone. But yeah, so it's a good point. How do you not make that like really kind of cookie cutter? And I think that's part of the challenge is to to vary the pace, vary the way that you manifest the answers to those questions. But I mean, personally, I just found it really helpful. Not everyone will, I guess. Everyone's mileage might vary.
Back with more from Patrick in just a sec. If you're enjoying the show and you'd like to help us out, if you'd like to support the podcast, well, you can do that on Ko-Fi and on Patreon. 2 brilliant ways that you can contribute to help us carry on. If you'd like to make it a rolling pledge to get access to a little writing community that we've got there with merch, with bonus content, and there is even a way for your book to sponsor the show, well, you can do that on Patreon for just a few dollars a month. It helps me bring you these episodes as often as I can. So that's how you can get involved and support us on a rolling monthly basis. I mean, that rolling monthly basis could be just 1 month if you fancy. If you do want to make it a one and done, just a tip or donation in the simplest possible way, well, you can do that on our Ko-Fi page. You can just send whatever you'd like on towards my page there at ko-fi.com/writers routine. Comes straight to the pod, and it helps me bring you these chats. So 2 fantastic ways that you can support the show on Ko-Fi and Patreon. Links for both are in the episode notes wherever you're listening. Let's get back to it then with Patrick Syms chatting about his new novel, Am I the Asshole? You can hear all about the inspiration for the book release that he's worked on. Also, the trickier parts of self-promotion, not self-publication. And we get back to it, talking about where he's at right now. He's got the book written. It's ready to go. What happens next?
I've got to a stage where I feel comfortable and confident sending it out on query, which I've done in the last few weeks. But at the same time, everything I've read about and everything I've heard about that query process, it's, in the nicest way in the world, it's pretty hellish. There's a ton of competition. The process is glacially slow, and you're always the whim of whatever happens to be the latest trend or fad in publishing. And, you can never really second guess those because you start writing and it takes you a year or 2 or 3 to finish, and, who knows where you're going to be. So in an attempt to make that process slightly less hellish, I thought, well, why don't I try to make myself a bit more visible, make myself a bit more marketable, demonstrate that I'm open to participating in that marketing process, which is so important now, if you're lucky enough to get a publishing deal. So I've basically lifted an idea, a concept from the music business, and specifically the world of records, where for independent labels or independent artists even, it's very normal for a long time, and still is, to create a small batch of promotional records called a white label. And as the name suggests, it just comes in there's minimal packaging, just a plain sleeve and a white label on the record on which the barest of information is conveyed, either handwritten often, sometimes it's a sticker that's printed in your printer, or often hand stamps. And you can get quite creative with what those hand stamps look like. So I thought, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a white label promo of my novel at the same time that I send out my query letters. And if I'm lucky enough to get some sort of extra visibility, perhaps it may help, grease the wheels of that query process. And if, after 6 months, of querying agents, I get absolutely nothing, then at least I have this as a tangible piece of stuff to show for the best part of 3 years worth of work, and I can get on to the next thing, and hopefully that will get me where I want to go. So yeah, I'm not at this point releasing an ebook. I've got 300 of these things, each of them numbered. Every single one is different because the covers are hand stamped, and depending on the density of the ink and the position of the stamps, every single one will be unique. So, and they're all numbered. Once those 300 have gone off to influencers and journalists and agents, they're gone. And so, yeah, I'm kind of trying to have my cake and eat it. If I don't want to close down the route to traditional publishing, but at the same time, I want to keep the door open to self-publishing. And yeah, in 6 months, if no agent has said, yeah, come on, we'll take you on, I can then decide whether I want to e-publish as well, or self-publish that way. But yeah, like you said, for the time being, self-promotion, not self-publishing.
So it's a really a unique idea, and even though it's been lifted from record companies, and I think it's a really inspirational thing to do. I imagine though it's one of those things that was simpler in your head than when you actually came to the planning and the practicalities of publishing your own copies, 300 copies of a book. Just take us through the trickier moments of that journey, and what were you surprised at how hard it might be? I'm talking, high costs of printing, actually finding someone to get it out there. Like, what are the things that maybe we might not think about?
So when I first started thinking about this, I was admittedly thinking full-on self-publishing, and I contacted a relatively new hybrid publishing business, which on the one hand will do contract publishing for brands, but at the same time supports independent authors to self-publish. And they gave me a quote, and it came in at £11,000. And that was just to get to e-publishing stage. And I must admit, I kind of looked at that total and spat my coffee. But then when I looked at the itemization, it kind of makes sense. But I kind of quickly came to the conclusion that I didn't necessarily need, or rather, I felt I could afford to forego some of the kind of components. And then the next step was, well, if I can forego some of those components, can I manage that process myself? So, for example, of that 11 grand, at least 3.5 of it was editorial. And I got to the point where I was confident enough that structurally it was good enough. Could it be better? I'm sure it could be, but it was good enough. Proofreading, I thought, well, I might pay for that separately. It included cover design, and I essentially partnered with someone else on the cover design. So in the end, I kind of realized that really the only bits that I was going to need to manage myself was physically the printing, the finding someone to proofread and typeset, because I wanted it to look good inside as well. And that was about it, really. And then even then in the process, don't tell anyone this, but I forwent, if that's the right word, the proofreading, because I've had I'm part of 2 writing groups, and a lot of people have looked at the manuscript and have been super detail oriented, more than I ever could be, and I think I've got most of them. So I decided not to pay for the proofreading, but I did invest in a really top rate designer to typeset it. So in the end, all I've done really is contacted CPI, who I found because I looked at a whole bunch of books on my bookshelf, and it turned out that they have an office dedicated to independent publishers and self-published authors, and they were amazingly helpful, and I thought really, really good value. And so in the end, I did this all for a fraction of that initial quote of 11.5 grand. And that 11 grand, like I said, didn't include physical books. So now, I've spent a fraction of that. I've got physical books that I'm really happy with and I'm really proud of. And yeah, I haven't had to do a huge amount of of kind of do it yourself, because there's so little to it, to be honest.
And you say you're happy for in the future if this maybe is picked up and another publisher or agent, whatever, wants to run with it. But how has maybe that thought changed? Getting it printed, having them, finally it's there. This not just writing, but having to figure out everything that you just discussed about doing all the back end of them being printed. Well, you open the box and they're there. It's your thing that you've done yourself in front of you. How much did that change any future plan for it? Maybe not at all.
No, it didn't. I mean, I got a huge buzz out of just making these things. And I'm actually looking at like 40 of them sitting on the rug in front of me, because I've discovered that basically the hand stamps are in 2 colors. And I discovered that I need to leave a long time between colors so that they don't run. So yeah, I get a huge buzz out of actually physically doing this and having this thing in my hand. Would I want to continue doing this? Possibly. I think the thing that I'm probably struggling to see beyond right now is that, I'm really keen to start the next one. I start writing and planning the next one, but what the process I'm in right now, it's kind of all consuming, and I haven't really got time to do anything else. So, hustling, trying to talk to people, trying to persuade people to read it and take a copy, blah, 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 all of that, printing them, because I'm printing every single individual copy myself. That is quite an overhead in terms of time. Were I to get to a point in the future where this continued to be a component of a broader kind of suite of things that I did, yeah, possibly. I mean, like I said, I get a buzz out of making things, tangible things. So yeah, put it this way, I haven't been disappointed by it, put it that way. And I have a suspicion that even if I didn't have the whole kind of rationale and the rationalization of why I'm doing it, this is still something I'd like to do. It's fun.
And what's the plan of attack with it now then? You kind of mentioned sending it off to agents, publishers, influencers, ... What's the grand idea of getting it out there, and hopefully where might this lead you?
I wish there were a grand idea. It's more a big pile of tiny ideas that I've just got to work my way through and hustle. And that is also kind of quite time consuming, I guess. I mean, did I say this to you, or did I say this to someone else I was speaking to earlier? I mean, if I'd been really smart about this, I would have really consciously worked to create a social media following at the beginning of the process, like 2 or 3 years ago, so that now, had I managed to amass 50,000, 100,000 followers on TikTok or Bookstagram, then it will be a completely different proposition. But I never really, even though I thought about it, I never really felt in a place to start doing that. You know what I mean? So yeah, that now I've just got a long list of things that I could possibly do, things that I could possibly try. And I'm just plugging my way through, contacting people, proposing things and seeing what works. So, for example, Richard, my protagonist, part of his backstory is, he came of age in the 1990s in Manchester. He went to a fictitious nightclub in Manchester that was kind of almost a warehouse party, but it was sort of semi-official. And he's constantly kind of harking back to that, and he kind of feels that like modern music is crap and everything was amazing in the past. And so I thought, well, there's a thing on YouTube, which is this idea of kind of DJ sets, people playing records to camera. I mean, it's, on the one hand, it's not very exciting, but it's because it's music, basically. That's all it is. But it's a huge thing, and there are some really big accounts. So I thought, why don't I propose that I'll do a set for them that is basically music for a fictitious dance floor. So the fictitious dance floor being this nightclub back in the 1990s in my novel, and I could curate a kind of a playlist, a set list for this imaginary club, and there's a nice little story there potentially. So I approached one of these big accounts, and to their credit, they got back to me relatively quickly, and they were very complimentary, but they said, sorry, no can do. Do you know what I mean? So I've got like a billion other like potential ideas like that I'm just going through. Some people are saying yes, some people are saying no. You kind of have to take it as it comes, really. But, I'm just kind of banging away, hustling as much as I can.
And in the future, you came to this second life of a writing career with a load of ideas in the bag, things that you wanted to explore and write about. You said that this process of self-promoting what you've done has taken away from space that you'd like to be writing with. What comes next? Is there a long numbered list of the ideas that you want to tackle one at a time?
Yes, there is, but the problem is that there are three things vying to be next. So one is something I actually started and got quite a long way with way back when I was in that screenwriting phase. So it's a good 25 years old, this idea. But it's essentially a kind of a sliding doors, parallel lives type thing. I recently read Jodi Picoult's novel. Is it The Book of Two something? Oh, it was absolutely amazing. And so that kind of re-energized that idea for me. The second one is something that I was really excited about. And now that there's a new mayor in New York, it might actually be back on the priority list. It's about love and betrayal in the nightclubs of New York. I lived in New York for 5-6 years at the kind of beginning of the 2010s, and I've got a real love for New York. So yeah, that's something I'd really like to do. And the third one is a kind of a dystopian near future thing, which is about politics. I suspect actually that's going to be a long time gestating, I think. So it's probably going to be one of the other two. But yeah, I'm having trouble deciding which at the moment.
And that's it for this week's episode of Writer's Routine. Thank you so much to Patrick for coming on the show. That new book is Am I the Asshole? Now, normally at this point, I would kind of tell you, push you, link you towards buying a copy if you fancy. I don't really think you can do that with this for all the reasons that you've just heard of. Patrick has a website though, patricksyms.com, so you're more than welcome to have a look at his Substack, maybe try and get in touch with him that way, and who knows where the future will take him and his writing. It was a real joy to chat to him. If you would like to get a copy of any book though, as we get towards Christmas, please do use the bookshop.org link that you've got in the episode notes wherever you're listening, because that supports the author, this podcast, and your local independent bookshop, all right? And they even do ebooks now. So if you are thinking of getting a book, use that link if it's not too much trouble. You can get in contact with the show as well, writersroutine.com. You can drop us a follow on X. We're on Instagram as well. And I will see you next week with a brand new episode of the podcast. Until then, thanks for listening.